that's what it means to really dream. I have a dream, oh, I have a dream. Red, white, and blue, fly free, fly free. I believe, oh, I believe. Will you dream with me?
Good morning, everyone out there. Welcome to Changing Times. It is Wednesday, October 11th, 2023. We are live at the Axe Media headquarters in Springfield, Missouri. And folks, we have a great show today, a very special show. This is a continuation of part one that Larry Ballard, our guest. How are you doing today, Larry?
Doing great.
We appreciate you being here. We got Matt Pearson. He's our volunteer producer. All of us here are volunteers. I was almost saying producers, and you wouldn't want me to produce this show. but no, so we've got a great show lined up. This we're going to talk about how we restore our republic without creating a civil war. I mean, I've read books. I've read books about predictions of this country is going to be in a civil war. Mm-hmm. You know, when you see how divided we are, then you kind of understand where they're coming from in talking about the intensity and the differences and everything that we feel in America. And so Larry, through God, is going to share some information today. And when we start this show, we'll probably go back in 2 or 3 slides and go back to the end of part one. Then we're going to go into part two. I want you to pay attention because this is extremely important information today. And but you and I were talking just a minute ago. I think it's a good time because we have new people watching every week that's never seen our show before. Mm-hmm. So they don't know who you are. They don't know that you wrote this book, Liberty Crusade. They don't know that you have another book at the publishers that's going to be out soon. They don't know that God told you to write 3 books and the message in all 3 books and to bring the truth out and what's going to be happening in our country and around the world. So just real quickly, let's spend 5 minutes talking about how did you get involved and what created this connection with God?
Well, I think 18 or 19. It was 1968. I was in college and I had some time between classes and I took a ride in the Ozark Mountains. And I went around a curve and bam, they had laid oil and gravel down and I went down. I went over a cliff. My motorcycle went airborne and landed in a pine tree, and I went headlong into a tree and was knocked unconscious. I didn't actually die, but I felt my spirit leave my body, and next thing I knew, I was unconscious for 4 hours, and I had an encounter with God, and he gave me an assignment. I wasn't a Christian at the time. I had never read the Bible. I wasn't going to church, but still he had a destiny for me. So he gave me an assignment, and it was very specific and very detailed. He said, I want you to go back and read the Bible and become a Bible scholar. And I want you to study history. And I'm going to give you an assignment. And your assignment is going to be unique. You're not going to go out to deliver this message for years, for decades. It's been 55 years now because people aren't going to be ready to hear what you have to say until we're on the very brink of collapse. And the world is in utter, absolute chaos. And you'll know also because your hair will begin to be salt and pepper. So my hair is salt and pepper, at least the temples. And my goodness gracious, are we in turmoil? Look at what's happening over in Israel right now. Look at what's happening in Russia. Look at the state of the U.S. economy. Look at our border. Look at our financial condition. I mean, if we're not in chaos, I don't know what is. So what he told me was he was going to prepare me in some very specific ways. He was going to have me have several accidents, every one of which would kill me. And he said, that's going to be because when you come out, it's going to be dangerous and they're going to come against you. They're going to threaten you. So he said, I'm going to show you that you've got a guardian angel and no matter what, nothing's going to happen. So real quick, here's some of the accidents that God said allowed for me to have. I was working in construction, building high rises. I was on the outside of a building 5 stories up. I hooked up my safety harness. I leaned back. It popped. I fell. I never hit the ground. My foot went up and caught. And I hung upside down until somebody saw me and they came and got me. I had a couple of more accidents on the job. I'll just keep this brief. But then I had a cave accident, and I don't know if it's an artery or if it's a vein, but that big bulge right there, I lacerated that. My friends took me to the emergency room. I was woozy. I had lost quite a bit of blood. The doctor hit it with a swab so that he could clean it and put stitches in. It burst. If that had burst in that cave, I'd have been dead. So that's how close God brought me to death. There were a couple of more accidents. I was in a head-on collision, 70 miles an hour. Engine ended up where I'd been seated. I jumped in the back seat because I was a passenger. Then God said, you want to graduate? And now I'm out of college. I'm working, and I'm leaving Sioux Falls, South Dakota on a twin-engine prop. And the engine blew. And it caught on fire. They feathered it. They put the fire out. But the plane only had 2 engines, so it's listing at about a 25-degree angle. Pandemonium broke out. People were crying, screaming, yelling, praying. Everything was going on. God says, if you want to graduate, do what I tell you. Stand up. I stood up and I said, God said, not one person on this plane is going to have one hair on their head harmed. So as we came down, that pilot, I got to give him credit. He flipped that plane to the other side and leveled it, and we hit and we bounced down the runway. The next morning, it was the front page of the Sioux Falls paper, and all the trucks that were out there, they had the pictures. When I got off that plane, everybody applauded because they knew they had been part of a divine miracle from God. So the next part of my assignment was God said, your career and your life is going to be a little unusual. You're going to change jobs about every 3 years. And every job you get is ordained by me because it's going to be strategically significant. And most of them you're not going to be qualified for. So I'll run you through 2 or 3 of the jobs that I got that I shouldn't have gotten. Well, maybe let me start with one that I certainly did get. I was still in college, and I was just a lowly janitor at Monsanto Chemical. Well, why was that important? Because I got interested in what they were doing. And what did I learn? I learned about GMOs way before it became part of the mainstream conversation. Then I'm out of college now, and he says, I want you to work for Atomic Energy of Canada. That's based out of Canada. So I applied, but I knew I didn't have the qualifications because I read the job description. They wanted a double electronics engineer or a PhD physicist because I was going to be selling linear accelerators. I was going to be a school teacher. So I said to the headhunter, I've got a heck of a resume. I'm top of my, in every organization I've worked for, I'm always number 1 or number 2 salesman. Tell them that. Don't give them my resume. I walk in, they ask for the resume, I hand it to them. They said, Mr. Ballard, you're not qualified. This interview's over. And I remained seated. And I said, guys, look, come on. You haven't got another interview for an hour. Just talk to me for a minute. And I said, I did my homework. The last 2 people you hired, you fired. One was a double electronic engineer, the very thing you say you want. And the other was a PhD physicist. Don't you think maybe it's time you considered hiring a salesman? Well, we finished the hour-long interview. 3 weeks later, they called me and offered me the job. Now, why did God want me to work there? 2 reasons. One, I was to learn about how energy, water, food were all control mechanisms. But the second is Canada was under socialized medicine, and I saw 2 people die from cancer before they ever got in to have treatment. And so I understood early on when Clinton first started talking about taking us on socialized medicine, that it was one of those control mechanisms. Just like you control food, if you control people's health, you control them. And then I left and I got a job, another one I shouldn't have had, working for CGR Mev in Paris, France. Well, why did God send me there? Because it was early on, it was still in the 60s, and we were still forming the European Union. And all the pastors were saying, it's going to be the 10-headed beast. Well, no, because now there's 28 nations in the EU. So it wasn't that. So God woke me up and said, you want to know what that really is? He said, go to your Bible. And he said, go to Revelation 17:12. And here's what it says. He says, there shall become a time when there shall be 10 kings upon whose heads crown So people immediately believe that dragon is China. No, because the Bible says that beast is different from the other beast in the combination beast in the book of Revelation. They're all single entities. It's a church and it's a number of nations. This is a verse from the others. And the key to understanding who it is the horns with 10 crowns. So God says, well, now that you've got my starting point from the book of Revelations, go to the UN. And what do I find in the UN? It says, we have an objective to end all sovereign nations. And we want to form 10 servile, meaning their constitutions have been taken, trading blocks. The first of which was the UN, which had its constitution stripped away from it and became a socialist communist order. And now they came after the U.S. to try to do it to us under Bush, trying to form something called the Amero Union. And one of our earlier presentations, I listed all 10 of the trading blocks. So basically, God kept walking me through. There's just one more stop I want to make, and then we'll get into today's presentation. At one point, I had a patent, and I wanted to have some tool and die making done, and they had just opened up China for people to come in. So I went there immediately. Happened to be there right when Tiananmen Square was happening. I was in Tiananmen Square just a few days before that massacre, and the people were just coming up in droves around all the Americans because they wanted to know what it felt like to live in a nation that had freedom. I was still in China. I wasn't in Tiananmen Square when the massacre happened, but I was still in China when that massacre happened. But I had an opportunity to see something unique because I was there on a tour, but I also got access to one of their sweatshops because I was going to have tool and die making made. And immediately God said to me, this is why I sent you here. I want you to understand that they're going to take trade away from the U.S. and they're going to give it to China. And the first step in doing that is to take the tool and die industry away from the U.S. So what they did, in retrospect, we found out every time they made a tool for some manufacturer, well, they kept the blueprints and made one for themselves. And so then they invaded the U.S. and came in and started undermining our production and our manufacturing process. And that became the process of making China great and bringing America down. So that's the journey that God set me on. And he had me change jobs every 3 years. He had me study history. And with that, what he said is, when you come out with your message, they're going to come against you, just like they will many people before you. But the difference is the people who come before you, they're going to successfully call them conspiracy theorists. They're not going to be able to do that to you because you'll be grounded in the Bible, which itself is a history book, and you'll be grounded in history. And once you give the history site of a tipping point that happened and show that it happened, it's cast in concrete. And at that point, they can't call you a conspiracy theorist because it's real. It happened. And then what he said to me is, with those two grounding fundamentals, I'm going to give you the opportunity to have so much information that you can see global events from the 60,000 foot level where things are clear instead of down in the forest where you can't see. So what I've been able to do is put massive numbers of pieces of data together, to put the pieces together to see patterns. And what that allows me to do is to look into any news event and say, this happened, this happened, this happened. These were the circumstances that triggered those events. I know what the next event is going to be. And so that's part of where we're at right now, is we're looking into the future based on the Bible as a historical document and based upon historical tipping points that have happened in the past. So, Lynn, unless you got any other questions.
Well, I tell you, I tell you what, that is fascinating, Larry. And this is just a great example why we have Larry on the show. I mean, you know, there are so many just tremendous men and women of the Bible. They know the Bible. They know everything about the Bible, and you do that. And then a lot of people know history. We're going to have a gentleman on next week that's expert in the Middle East, and he has family in Israel right now, Dr. David Romano from Missouri State University. He's going to be on our show. We're going to be talking about Israel next week. But you know history. You know history, and you know it up, backwards, forwards, upside down, everything. You know history. So you got all that put together, and then you've got communication with God, and he's directing you, and so makes you a very special person. That's why you're a difference maker, and you're being the change, like what Don Blackard would say. So let's go, because, you know, a lot of us want to restore our republic. We know we've lost it. We're losing it. We've lost it. We need to change directions, and we actually need to do that without creating a civil war, because a lot of we don't want another civil war like our country went through, with the North and the South and friends and families fighting each other. We don't want that. We want one country that's our country, and we want our republic back. So let's go.
This is actually part two. Part one was much more intense. It was basically how we lost our republic in the first place. I'm going to go through a couple of slides that are going to give you a high-level overview of what we did last. But then we're going to come to this section, and this is a little less intense, but I decided to do this because I had all kinds of people who said, I've lost my faith. My faith in God, my faith in the prophets. I'm just totally done. We've been since 2019 and nothing's changed. And I'm done. So I wanted to do this show to show them, no, there's a reason it's taken so long. Nothing in the world happens unless God picks the time, and he's always on time. He's never late. So what this is all about is, if we had had the disclosure that the election was in truth stolen, and we had tried to ramrod Donald Trump back into the office of the presidency and take Biden out and declare the election fraudulent, there were enough people at that point in time that we would have absolutely had civil war. Look at what they did in Portland and all over the country with the riots. So this has been we've been indoctrinated for at least 20 to 30 or maybe even 40 years. There's a large portion of America that has been totally, utterly, completely brainwashed. So this period from 2019 till now has been to slowly drip the truth out and to basically counter-oppose what Trump did to make America great versus what Biden is doing to tear America down. So with that, the message to the people out there is, be patient. This is coming to an end. It's all a movie. So I'm going to go back now, and I'm going to give you the essence of the last show. I'm going to go all the way back to the year 1871. And in 1871, that was one of those tipping points, one of many. And we found out at that point in time that America lost its constitution, that we became a corporation, and that we were in fact because of bankruptcies that had happened, we were a United States crown corporation under the Vatican and the Swiss government. So with that, I'm going to read you an excerpt from our congressional record, and I'm going to refer you to the 41st Congress, Section 34, Session 3, Chapter 61 and 62. And it says that on this date, Congress passed an act titled An Act to Provide a Government for the District of Columbia, i.e., the Act of 1871. Now, I want to tell you what that means. That means that there's a 10-mile area within the United States of America that is not one of our states, that is not part of the United States of America. It has its own governmental system, and that is where our Congress sets. And that's very important because we lost our Constitution and we became a corporation. And if we go to the next slide, I'm going to tell you how we were originally formed. We were the first nation in the world to be formed as a republic, and that is very unique. Today, we hear ourselves called what? A democracy, but we're not a democracy. If we go back, it says the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the what? The republic for which it stands, one nation under who? God. All right, now, what is a republic? A republic is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It is a government with First and Second Amendment rights, with the freedom of speech. It is a government based upon self-governance by the people. And in order to be a government that is controlled by the people, for the people, something unique has to happen. The people have to be educated. So that's why one of the first things our founders did was found Harvard, so that everybody could be not only illiterate, but so that they could also be able to read the Bible and understand the Bible. Then they had pamphleteers that passed out information so that we would be politically astute, so that when we went to vote, we would be voting because we were literate and we were informed, and we were making decisions based on what was in the best interest of who? Not ourselves, but in the best interest of the nation. I forgot to turn my phone off. So basically, that was what made us unique, because we were not controlled by special interest groups at that point in time. We were the people voicing our opinions as to what we thought was the best form of government for ourselves. So as a result of the Act of 1871, we lost that and we became a corporation. So here's the definition of a corporation: a legal entity that is separate and distinct from its owners. In other words, it gives them some freedom from liability. And what is their charter? Well, instead of being a government of the people, for the people, it is a charter of a corporation. And the only responsibility a corporation has is a fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders. So what does that mean? We have 2,000 page omnibus bills that are written that spend trillions of our dollars, and they're basically written by special interest groups. They're signed by our Congress without ever reading them, and systematically, one by one, they take our rights away and they create what? A legal dictatorship. That's the system. Legally, they have been passing laws to strip away our freedoms and our rights since 1871. So with that, we can move on and we'll start to get into the stuff for today as soon as my slide presentation will work. So basically, this takes us up to one Donald J. Trump. And I want to go to the Bible. I believe that Donald J. Trump is anointed by God. And I believe that there's reason to believe, make an analogy at least, that he's our Cyrus. King Cyrus was the king in the Bible that set the Israelites free and helped them finance the building of the temple and the wall. And so what did Trump do? He came in and he did what? Built the wall to try to end our border incursion. And what did Biden do the second he came in?
Tore down the wall.
Stopped it. He said, we're not going to build anymore. And what did Trump do to make America great? It's not that Trump is a genius. It's that Trump has advisors, particularly in the military, who know what it takes to make a nation great. And it's very simple, folks. God said, I will make you able to take the complex and make it simple so that people can see the truth, so the truth can set them free. So here's what Trump did to make America great. He basically came back in and gave us our oil and our manufacturing, and we became a net exporter of oil. He changed regulations so that money could flow in to this country, and we would be able to build infrastructure and factories. He then geared up our manufacturing. Then he went against China and said, we're going to impose a tariff against you to do what? To make Chinese goods too expensive so that we would manufacture more ourselves. Because now, if you have control of your natural resources, control of manufacture, control of trade, so we went from losing trade to fair profit-making trade, then you have money. And with that money, the global elite buy power in order to what? To imprison us, to take away our rights. So Trump turned all that around, and America went from $10,000 in the stock market to 30. What did Biden do? He undid it. He took away our oil so that we were begging for oil. And he basically undid every single solitary thing that Trump did. This is part of that drip, 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 folks. We need to see the contrast between what Trump did to do what? Make America great, compared to what Biden did, the exact opposite, which has resulted in the financial crisis that we're in today. So with that, we'll move on. And my computer is not cooperating. All right. So this is from an earlier presentation, but I need you to understand this is coming from God. In the Bible, it says that the kingdoms of man must fall in order that he can implement the kingdom of God. Well, what that means is communism must fall and capitalism must fall. And what does that mean? Well, who are the two nations that represent those two forms of government? The United States and China. So what God is basically saying is, folks, don't be alarmed at the possibility that the United States is going to have a financial collapse. It must happen. So America is going to fall, China is going to fall. How is that going to happen? China is getting its manufacturing stripped away from it. Since COVID, the world has viewed China as A pariah, and B, unable to support the global supply chain. They've had all the shortages that have happened. You wait a year for an iPhone, you wait a year for an automobile, and then how are they going to take America down? And that's with something called BRICS, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, joining forces with Saudi Arabia to say we're going to end the petrodollar, we're going to end the U.S.'s ability to be the world's reserve currency and control us through currency. So God is saying, I'm going to strip away control of China by trade, control of the U.S. by the dollar, and I am going to put my own system in. And basically, we talked about that in detail, but I'll just give you a real quick idea of what that means. It means we're going on to a commodity-based system. We are going to change to a system that says instead of making products made in China that are designed to have an expiration date, 6 months, a year, then you got to throw it away and build it again. We're going to have products that are going to be based on longevity, designed to last forever, to be reusable, to be repairable. And look at what that's going to do to our resource consumption. The global elite are saying that we have a shortage of natural resources. Well, of course, they're causing the shortage. If we go to this new economic system from God, where we are conserving our resources, that problem goes away. And the lie that they've given us about the cause of climate change coming from our carbon footprint goes away. So with that, we'll go on down. And this was BRICS. I think I kind of got ahead of myself. But basically, I can make a point. If you look at that map that's on here, you'll see the portion in green. And America is part of the G7. We represent 20% of the world's population. But BRICS now represents 80% of the world's population. So if they want to end the US dollar, the US dollar is going to end. That's all there is to it. It's going to end. And so basically, we'll move on. And here's where we get into the reason I did this portion, part 2, because people were utterly, absolutely, and completely confused as to why it was taking so long. So Trump in 2016 went on a world tour, and I want to basically go back and take you through the highlights of that tour and show you that was a drip, 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 showing us what was going on. So the first place he went was Saudi Arabia. And the prince, whose name I can't pronounce, he's in the upper picture there, immediately was removed, was arrested along with a bunch of other princes, and bin Solomon became the prince. Now, what you see in that picture is a famous ceremony that they have every time they're going to go to war. They do the sword dance, or every time there's a change in the leadership in Saudi Arabia, they do a sword dance. Only the crown prince is to hold that sword. They passed it to Trump. So what does that mean? That means that Trump is an ally of Saudi Arabia in what they consider to be a war. So we look at Saudi Arabia, and I think the general public, since they're now involved in BRICS, and that's going to collapse the dollar, think they're our enemy. No. Saudi Arabia is performing a function that needs to happen that is God ordained, which is to bring the dollar down. Now, let me stop there. Don't panic, folks. We're going to have a huge financial crash, and it's going to be scary, and it's going to last several months. But I've got a whole show that's on why America, the only nation in the world ordained by God for this purpose, will rise like the phoenix and restore the financial system in the world. Russia can't do it. China can't do it. Iran can't do it. Brazil can't do it. We are the only nation that has enough control over manufacturing, over trade, over natural resources, and the global reach with our Navy to be able to restore after this collapse comes. That's God's appointed purpose, to collapse the two governmental systems of man and put his system in, and to equalize and elevate the condition of all mankind, which is going to take us into what? The harvest of souls and a period of peace and prosperity that's unheard of.
So, Larry, that's good news. And that's what should create all this hope for all these people.
Yes.
That are feeling hopeless today. They have lots of mental issues going on and lots of things, So I think that's a scary truth, but something that can restore our faith.
Yes. So I want to go through the nations specifically that are part of BRICS, because I think the perception is that they're anti-American. Well, so let's look at Brazil and let's look at China and say, is Brazil really that close to China? Well, the government is what I believe might be called the fake government, but the people of Brazil basically hold this opinion. We've been deindustrialized by China, meaning that their standard of living has gone down because China has come in with their free trade and they've undercut them and taken their manufacturing away, and they've put the people of Brazil in financial hardship. So the people of Brazil are in this for a reason. The people of Brazil and all the people in BRICS and the 80% of the world that's behind them want to be free from control by the US dollar and controlled by China as well. So they're just looking to be able to make purchases of internationally traded commodities in their own currency. It's not because they're hooked at the hip to China. And then we go on down and we come to one that's, I hope most people realize this one. India and China are not friends. They've got a border dispute that's been going on for decades, and they're strategically positioning themselves in the Indian Ocean. Basically, China has some vulnerabilities. The Straits of Malacca are only 1.5 miles wide, and if that strait should be mined like we did to end the Vietnam War, then trade through that strait is cut off. China has lost its supply chain, but it more importantly has lost its access to oil. 75% of the oil goes through that strait, and in its estimated 90 days, they would be out of oil. So what's happened is China has built what they call the string of pearls. Between those nations. So if people think, hey, they're bosom buddies, nothing could be further from the truth. And then we go to the next country. We go to China and we go to Russia. And now on the surface, they're friends. You know why? Because, well, Russia's selling a lot of oil to who? China. So they've got an economic, reason for being associated. But if we go back in history, which is what God had me do, we find out that Russia has forever been anti-globalist. It was Russia who stopped the formation of the first attempt to create a United Nations. And it was Russia who came in the Civil War and said to the European nations, nah. If you guys come into that Civil War on the side of the South, we're going to come in on the side of the North. And so Putin has been and continues to be an anti-globalist. And what's the tell that tells us that? They start a war, they break a nation, they put in a central bank, and the central bank is according to Stalin, 90% of establishing communism in a nation. So there's only 3 nations in the world that don't have a central bank, 2 tiny little nations and 1 great big one, Russia. So Russia is the only nation in the world that isn't controlled from cradle to grave by the central banking system. So they're anti-globalists. So to think that China and Russia are on the same page, not bet your bippy, it isn't the case. All right, so let's move on. And my computer just keeps messing up. So this is just a supposition on my part, folks. I can't prove this. I'm just going to lay this out there for you to think about. And the question is, do you think that the U.S. and China are friends, are mortal enemies? Where are we? I think it's just possible that the CCP, who is clearly our enemy, might have fallen under all the stress that's happened economically in China. They've had the collapse of the real estate market, which is 33 1/3% of their GDP. They're having the collapse of their trade, which is 53% of their GDP. And I believe that China's CCP may have fallen, putting Russia, the United States, and China all more or less as allies. Now, they're enemies in other regards, but in this particular instance, I think we may be allies because we all need to have those 2 governmental systems collapse. And then we come to the story of the day, Russia. And our government right now that intersects with another thing that's happening, and that's the war in Israel. And so basically, what's the government doing? We just came out of a war that cost us $13 trillion, the Mideast war, and practically bankrupted us. So now what are we doing? We're not putting money into our border to keep America safe, to do what Trump said, make America great. We're spending money in Ukraine. There's a bill asking for $25 billion. And the Congress said, well, we don't know if we want to continue funding Ukraine, at least not at that level. So what's Congress trying to do? They say, well, we surely want to help Israel, our number one ally. So if you don't pass the bill to fund Ukraine, we're not going to give you money to fund Israel. So where are we? We're right back to the strategy that they've used for hundreds of years. Drive a nation to the death through war and control it. So let's look at Russia and let's see if God might be part of what Putin's doing. There's a justification for him being in this war. It goes back to what we saw with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Basically, they wanted to bring Ukraine into NATO and place missiles right on the border of Russia. And there's the belief that Ukraine is a money laundering capital of the world, that they've got bioweapons. And what if they loaded some bioweapons on those missiles and shot them to Moscow? So Putin needed to defend his nation. He asked and asked and asked for them not to do that, and it fell on deaf ears. Now, if we go to the Bible, we find out something interesting that may tell us what Putin's doing. The Bible tells us that Russia is part of the combination beast when we get into tribulation. But it also tells us that Russia, the bear, is the sleeping bear. So I believe God has sent Russia out now to take out Ukraine because of the money laundering and because of the pedophilia that goes on there. But then they have to go back to their own nation. It's not going to be like the news says, where they're going to attack one country after another and try to recreate Mother Russia. The bear is going to go back to sleep after it gets rid of the threat that's facing it. So now we come to Hillary Clinton and Trump and Putin. And again, I can't prove this, but I can tell you this. Hillary has done some egregious things, including deleting 34,000 emails. And Putin, the anti-globalist, and Trump, the anti-globalist, are passing a soccer ball back and forth. And basically, Putin says the ball's in your court. Now, there's a lot of supposition that says that this is signifying that Putin gave Trump all of Hillary's deleted emails. So in this drip, drip, drip process, they always hold the major information until the very end, when the opposition can't come out and really do anything about it. So I believe that very shortly we're going to see an atomic bomb of truth come out that's going to expose not only Hillary's emails, but Nancy Pelosi's involvement in January the 6th, the truth about the election fraud, etc. So I'm moving on. We're on that tour that Trump went on, and we're in the Vatican. And I want you to look at this picture. We've got a Trump that I call the Cheshire Cat, grinning from ear to ear, and the Pope who looks like he swallowed a poison pill. Well, supposedly, Trump went to all these different nations and laid down a stack of information that says, I have it all. You are now puppeted by me. And so I can't prove this, but what is circulating by a lot of different people is that the Vatican, who happens to be one of the wealthiest places in the world, and another one of those pieces of geography that's not part of the nation that it resides in, and is part of the evil that control us, along with the city of London, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C., had a vast amount of gold that they got from the people during the time when they were doing the Inquisition. That gold just may have been confiscated, and that may be what this picture is indicating. Now we go to Europe, and we see Donald Trump walking in front of the Queen. Nobody has ever done that before. And then we see him with Merkel, and look at the look on her face and on his face. And then we see him with Macron, poking Macron in the chest. And then we see him with the head of Canada, and look at that look on Trump's face. So what is he telling us? In every one of those instances, he has delivered a message to those nations saying, we have it all. We have it all. I'm now your puppet, and you're now in my control, not the reverse. So now we're going to get into what you might call conspiracy theory, the only thing I've talked about so far that's really not based on fact. and that is this Q movement. And basically what I'm showing you is an aerial photograph of the gravesite of Kennedy, and it happens to be a Q. And most people don't know that John F. Kennedy Jr. and Donald Trump were lifelong best friends. And there's some who believe that the man to the far right might be John F. Kennedy Jr. in disguise, and that he is part of, he did not die, he's part of the, if we want to call it conspiracy theory, the white hats that are trying to take our nation back. So let's give a little bit of a glimpse into that and see if there could be any truth to it. Can't confirm, but basically we know this. We know that John F. Kennedy was running for Congress, and in 1999 he was declared the leader. Right after that, he dies mysteriously in this plane. His body's never found, and Hillary becomes the front runner and gets elected. And we sort of know that there's some belief that Hillary might have a few bodies buried in association with her history. Now, we're almost to the end, folks. And here's what I want you to pay attention to. We are, according to Sun Tzu, a 5th century military strategist, the greatest military mind in the world, says that we're on death ground. You have to look at a war and you have to assess where you are. Are you in the beginning, in the middle, or are you in the end at the final battle? We're at the final battle. So here's the strategy that we've had going on for decades. They push us. When we begin to resist, they back off. And then after a while, they push us again, and then they back off. But now that's not happening. Something's changed. This is a full-blown push. This is the end. So I did a show a couple of weeks ago on 9/11, and I told you how 9/11 laid the groundwork with the Patriot Act for imposition of a legal dictatorship. That's happening again with what's happening in Israel. So what we're seeing is we're seeing legislation coming out of the EU, which I've talked about as part of the nations that are involved in the tribulation and the combination beast, is now passing legislation that says, we really want to control this free speech thing. And they're trying to say to the media outlets, no, you don't have a choice anymore. If you don't censor according to what we want you to censor, we're going to levy gigantic fines on you that could potentially put you out of business. And so our freedoms are being taken away, folks. And the only thing protecting us here so far is our Constitution that says we have a First Amendment right. So I need you to understand we're on death ground. This is the time that America has to stand up. We have to have our eyes open. And what I believe is happening in this war now that's going on in Russia, and I rather Ukraine, and it's going on in Israel, is creating that final push that's going to bring everything together. And I'm expecting that there very likely may be some false flag events to occur in the United States, because what do they want to do? Create order out of chaos. So I believe that what's happening is the bad guys have said, we're in trouble now. We're like a wounded animal in the forest, and we have to make a gigantic push forward, and we have to win this war. Well, I believe my Bible tells me that the opposite is going to happen. Communism is going to fall, capitalism is going to fall, and we're going to have a total reversal. We're going to have the Esther effect, where we win and they lose. Now, this is a rendering had drawn by an artist, and I want to kind of close. We've only got one or two more slides. What you see is the combination beast in the book of Revelation. The lion represents England, and they are the mouthpiece of the beast. The four-headed leopard is Russia. Germany. We had the Third Reich, and then when 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, that meant that Germany became the Fourth Reich. They're part of that. And then we've got the bear, which is Russia that we've talked about. And then we've got the lady on their back, which is signifying the Catholic Church, in whose name all abominations have occurred. And then we have that beast, that dragon, with the 10 horns, with the 10 crowns. And what we're looking at, God, is God's interpretation of what's going to happen. It's the 10-headed or the 10-horned beast that we have to look at. And what they're trying to do right now is to totally, completely, and absolutely collapse us, lock us down, take away our total freedom, and implement that 10-nation servile trading bloc that brings the entire world into servitude. But instead, we're going to have an avalanche of truth, and the people are going to stand up. The people in the other nations are standing up, but America hasn't had enough pain yet. When we get the pain, we're going to stand up. And there's always a foreshadow. What was the foreshadow that indicates what we need to do? It was, we fought a revolutionary war, a bloody war to get our freedom. India simply said, we're going to rally around Mahatma Gandhi. We're going to have rolling strikes. And we're going to take the economic cloud away from from China, from Britain, and get our freedom. And so basically they broke Britain's economic system, and Britain says, you're free. So the people of the world are now standing up and saying, no, we're not going to participate in your economic system of slavery. Soon there'll be enough of an avalanche of truth that the American people are going to stand up and do the same. But first, we have to be brought to our knees, because God wants to usher in the harvest of souls.
Okay. Hey, Larry, we have run out of time.
And we're done.
I tell you what, I think you were done. So this show is brought to you by Brad Pistow, Certified Fiduciary Financial Planner, right in Ozark, Missouri, and John Whittaker, who now is the new owner of Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia. We'll talk about them more next week. You gave us enough information for an entire week or month in 45 minutes. I hope you all enjoyed this information today. We'll have Larry back on again, but just have a great rest of the week, and we appreciate you here at Acts Ministry. And I tell you what, Larry, you're a difference maker. I love that information. It makes us think, makes us pray for our country, pray for Israel, pray for everything in this world. Thank you.
It's all going to be all right.
It's going to be all right.